You're listening to Mark of the Maker, and this is episode 13. Hey everybody, this is Mark Steiner, and you're listening to Mark of the Maker. This is episode 13 of the podcast, and this episode we're going to talk about Randall Made Knives, and we'll get into some of that and have a little conversation about here in a minute. Let's make sure we got everybody here. Mr. Tom Cryan, are you with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
Michael Birch, are you here, man?
Here.
Mr. Sean Kendrick, are you with us, buddy?
Hey, bud.
All right. Okay, so we've been talking about this one for a long time. We've alluded to the fact that we're working on this episode for kind of a long time. And
right.
Part of the reason that we haven't gotten it done yet is that there's a very rich history of information available about Randall knives, and we wanted to try to make sure that we did it right and did our right amount of research and homework. And so we're going to give it our best shot here, and hopefully you enjoy some information. Then we're going to talk about some history and then about a couple of different cool sort of knives. And Tom, you want to throw any disclaimers in here?
Yeah, I mean, like Mark said, there's 80 plus years of history. And if we make some mistakes, let us know. We'll try to get the information out. I will say that there are different views on the story depending on where you look. One of the main books we're going to use is Randall Made Knives, The History of the Man and the Blades. It's by Bob Gaddis, and it's pretty much recognized as the Randall reference. Lots of photocopies of letters and a lot of information in there.
And I think a lot of the history that we're going to really focus on early years stuff and not as much the later, more recent years. I think some of those will kind of fill in the blanks when we start talking about knives. But all this early years time frame stuff is sort of in the latter part of the Skagel episode that we did before, right? So like you said, Tom, this is like 80 plus years ago at this point.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. So I think Sean was going to throw out some words here. When we did the Skagel episode, we wanted to make sure people understood why we were talking about Skagel and a little bit of purpose behind the episode. So Sean, you want to take a shot at why we're talking about Randall Made Knives?
Yeah, we're talking about Randall Made Knives because they've been around for 80 years and they are still relevant. Not only are they relevant, but they have maintained a mystique that nobody else has really attained. I mean, a Randall knife, there is an almost aura about it at this point, and with good reason. I mean, they've really paid their dues. They've earned it. And, a lot of the knives we really like today, a lot of the shapes that we like, Bo Randall did them or redid them, and we rediscovered them. I mean, to stay relevant that long, to have your designs stand the test of time, that's something to be admired. That's something to be talked about.
Very well said.
Thank you. With that said, I'll pass it over to Michael, and we'll get the ball rolling on this whole subject.
Well, I'm going to kick it off with just like a very brief little early life so we can kind of set the, tone for where he came from. His father worked for a company that was called the Champion Paper and Fiber Company, and he worked there until he retired in about 1932. That was in Ohio. But they had like these family friends that they used to visit in Orlando, and they ended up actually moving across the street from them around 1919. Now they kept their home in Ohio because Randall Sr. kept working there. But he also invested in citrus groves in Florida. I mean, the family was very smart, I think, with their money, did a lot of really, good business moves. And so Bo went to high school in Orlando and then went back to Ohio State to go to college. He didn't graduate, but he went back to work in the groves, and he married his wife, Ruth Brown, in around 1931. And he enjoyed doing woodworking in high school and kind of kept a small wood shop that turned into something a little bit better later on. Now, Mark, you want to talk about the incident?
Yeah. So in the Skagel episode, we talked about how Bo Randall came across a knife up near Walloon Lake in Michigan, where there was a guy that was scraping the bottom of a boat. I guess he was scraping off paint, right?
Correct.
And so he saw this guy scraping the paint on the bottom of this boat with a knife that appeared not to be taking any significant damage, and Bo was impressed by that. So I guess he must have asked the guy or to show him the knife, and this was a knife that was made by William Wales Skagel, who's the subject of our earlier history episode. So that's kind of the interesting connect the dots piece here. Is this is sort of the second in a chain of makers that we, as part of what we mentioned in the earlier Skagel episode. Now, for people's reference, this Walloon Lake area, the Randall family had a cottage there, and I think I don't know if they had a series of cottages in the beginning or if that happened over time, but they had some property at this place called Walloon Lake, which is up near Petoskey or Charlevoix, Michigan. So if you do my my Skagel episode Michigan map, you hold up your left hand with the palm facing away from you with your fingers together. It's kind of up, that represents the lower peninsula of Michigan. And this Walloon Lake area is kind of at the inside edge of your ring finger. So on the kind of western half of Michigan, but up very near the top, near the Mackinac Bridge. This Walloon Lake place, actually, there's a spot there where where the Randall family had their camp, basically, or cottages. It was originally called Air Castle Point, and it was owned by a judge out of Chicago up until 1903. And then another person bought it, and then I'm going to guess, less than 10 years later, the Randall family bought it. So it must have been when Bo's father was still working. And today, that place on the lake is on this prominent little peninsula that sticks out into the lake, and it's known as Randall's Point.
That's cool.
Yeah. And with the locals, I think one of the reasons it's well known is there's always an American flag out on the end of the point. So they always have the flag flying, which is kind of cool. And interestingly enough, you can actually go online, and the last cottage on the point is actually a rental property at this point. So Tom, there you go. That's the next big Crime family adventure. You go to Skagel's place in Fruitport, and then head on up and stay on Randall Point. How cool would that be?
That's would be cool. We've actually drove, I think that's Highway 31 that goes up through Charlevoix and Petoskey and all that, which is right near Walloon. I didn't realize that.
Yep.
Really cool.
Like Disneyland for knife makers.
Knife stalker makers.
Yeah, pretty much.
So here's another little interesting tidbit. Ernest Hemingway's family owned a house right across the lake at the point there. And so that's actually a historical, I think it's considered a national historical location, the Hemingway family cottage there called Windermere. And apparently it's still owned by some member of the Hemingway family. So I couldn't find any reference that suggested any tie between Bo Randall and Ernest Hemingway. I think Ernest Hemingway was about 10 years older. But knowing a little bit about Ernest Hemingway, it wouldn't be too terribly surprising, would it, that if he owned a Randall knife or somehow came across Bo Randall and his family as part of that whole thing.
In my head, they've at least had a couple.
That wouldn't be surprising at all.
They've at least had a couple adult beverages together.
Maybe so.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe so.
Super cool.
So anyway, Bo got turned on to the Skagel thing in it was 1937, and tried to make contact with Skagel, and it sounds like he bought a knife. When you guys want to fill in the rest of that story?
Sure. So yeah, that incident, depending on where you look, was 1936 or 1937, and Bo got back home, and he decided he wanted to try to make his first knife, and he didn't really have any history or information there. And basically there was a machine shop that had just opened down the street, and there was a guy there named Al Marchand, and he actually forged the first blades for Randall. So they tried some different stuff, some tool and die steel and some different stuff, and ended up going with automobile leaf springs out of a Chrysler. For whatever reason, Chrysler seemed to be what worked for him. And it's kind of crazy when you think about it. You know, the only power equipment that Bo had was a lathe, and he ended up buying a a grinding stone, and he put that on it, and that was his grinder. Pretty crazy. So he ground out his first blade after Al forged it and heat treated it, and basically he couldn't find stag for the handle, and the book says that he bought a bottle opener with a stag handle, and he pulled that off of it, and that's what he used to make that first knife. Interestingly enough, if you were at Blade Show, they had that first knife at Blade Show, and you could see it. It was out front with some of the other Randall stuff. Pretty neat.
I didn't see that at all.
Yeah, and what's the? There's a knife publication. It's like oversized. Used to be the newspaper like Knife Magazine.
Knife World.
Shoot, Knife World.
Yeah, Knife. Yeah, their new magazine has that on the cover, and there's a pretty good article on that first knife. But yeah, really interesting. One thing, we said in the earlier episode on Skagel, and this is where the stories kind of get mixed. We said that Skagel kind of showed Bo how to make knives, and conflicting stories. The best I could find out, asking someone who worked at Randall, was that he basically wrote a letter introducing himself. He was, at one time or another, he went to the Skagel shop, and William Skagel showed him around the shop, but didn't really teach him how to make knives. And he did purchase a knife, and then Skagel wouldn't really sell any more knives to him, and that's how Harry McAvoy got it. In that picture, he was buying knives for Bo for quite a while. But
it makes you
pretty neat.
It makes you wonder if their relationship was just a little less existent, or maybe a little more contentious than we thought. Because the early Randall knives were very, very Skagel-esque, like extremely. And I wonder if that was kind of a bone of contention, or if it just wasn't in a relationship that really existed. One of the two.
Well, I think there was a relationship there of some kind, because there are letters. I mean, we have copies of letters of correspondence between William and Bo.
Yeah.
I don't think William Skagel was a real outgoing person. So,
yeah, we pretty much covered
like
that.
If he talked to you at all, it was probably a good thing,
Mm-hmm. True.
I don't think if he liked you, he would even give you the time of day, based on what I've read about him.
True. Very true.
I think one of the things to point out here is, and this is consistent with most knife makers who are worth a damn, is the want to do. He didn't let a lack of tools or a lack of knowledge get in his way. He just jumped into the thing and he did it. And there's a lot to be said for that.
Yeah.
100%.
He found a way. And by God, he found a way pretty fast. Like when he went from, that first knife was 1937 or maybe 1936. We're not 100% sure. But like 1938, he took off like crazy. I mean, he basically went pretty much part-time at that point in 1938. They moved into a house on the shore of Lake Concord. He bought himself like a grinding and polishing head that was run by a motor, which was, pretty fancy for him. And then later on added like a flat bench grinder. And then he spent, alone just moving seems like it would take a long time. But then he spent about 3 months just working on materials and finding out what worked best for him. He would test them, and oddly enough, it was pretty similar to how the ABS does their testing. Bending test, shave test, and he would cut the Florida hard pine, which was supposedly a really, really hard wood, to see, if it would still shave afterwards. And he had like a special heat treat. What best worked for him was to bring the steel to cherry red, then quench in fish oil, which I bet smelled fantastic.
Damn, no kidding.
Then bring it back. Bring it back up to blue and re-quenching in water. And what's kind of different about these knives, and they still kind of carry it to this day, well, not these quite yet, but later on, their O1 and all that stuff is kind of a lower hardness than you'd find in what people presume is supposed to be like what we need. I think he kept like a 54 on his O1 because he said people had a hard time sharpening, the knives if they were harder than that. That's something.
Yeah, there was no diamond stones back then.
But it's just intriguing, that was how stuff was done, and it was perfectly fine. Those are knives that became the ones. And during this time, he would do a lot of, like Tom said, rehandling. Basically, he would kind of what we call pimping now. He would take a small knife and then rehandle it with what, became his fancy kind of look, which was stag and spacer material.
Very Skagel-esque.
Yeah, very, very Skagel-esque on this. And that kind of became his sort of thing. And he was still working with Al, the Al Merchant. There's a Merchant or Marchard?
Marchand.
Marchand.
I like that.
We got 3 pronunciations.
Yeah, pretty solid. I'll use all 3 throughout this.
Interchangeably.
I bet
it's derived from the French Les Marchands.
But he decided, that the removing handles part was just too time consuming. So he actually, this guy was a go-getter. He contacted W.R. Case and Sons at the end of that year and ordered just a bunch of blades so he can be rehandling them and selling them. And keeping in mind, this is also like the worst years of the Depression that he's doing all this work and doing this stuff, And then during this time, he started working on his first stamp, which was kind of like a Skagel, but it was $20, and he decided he's going to wait a little bit on that one.
Right. Well, and I think that may be part of the reason he did so many of the rehandle work, because he was trying to keep that down because it was a Depression.
Yeah.
Can you imagine starting a business in the Depression? This dude was pretty gutsy.
But at the same time, spending 3 months just wasting, because when you're testing stuff, you're wasting materials. You're spending time, you're right. Paying Al, and of course he made him a knife during that time, but he's still taking business, and doing it and wasting materials. Not waste, it's not a waste, but it's not a good time to be, not selling stuff. But he wanted to...
Yeah, there's no return on that.
Yeah, he wanted to get his process down. Well, I think the return was pretty much those 80 years, but it's interesting that he took those steps.
No return right now. You're doing stuff without...
Yeah, it'd be hard to go home and be like, well, what'd you do today? Well, we broke some stuff, just see what it would do. But...
Well, and I find it interesting, too, we look back 20 years ago and, man, we had it hard because there wasn't internet. Think about 80 years ago. There was no internet. There was no knife making suppliers. There was no such thing.
Mm-mm.
You couldn't call up Jantz or Koval's or Sheffield or whatever back in the day and order handle material or whatever. He had to source all this stuff.
Yeah. All these guys had to find their own sort of way of doing stuff and see what worked for them. There wasn't a lot of guys to be like, hey, does this look cool or is this going to work? No, you shoved it on there and, figured out later,
So,
yeah,
I don't know what the real, what do you think the history is in that time frame? The family, by that point, his father was retired. He was 30-ish years old, right?
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, their main location was in Florida. So, it almost sounds like, he was trying lots of different stuff, but it's not like there wasn't, it doesn't sound like there was a lack of other form of income.
No, whether there was money coming.
Orange groves or whatever.
The citrus groves, I think, must have done pretty well because they did a lot of moving around, a lot of, and of course, I don't know. They don't say about, how well they're doing, but it seems like they had the ability to do the stuff, the luxury of being able to work on this. This.
One of the things that I've wondered about in the back of my mind, on the Randall knives, we have those vulcanized fiber spacers. I wonder if, that was one of the products that his dad, made at the factory he was vice president of.
Yeah, I wondered. Right. I wondered that too. Where that came from, and if that was what it was.
it'd be neat to know if that's what that company, if because they have fiber in their name, I think. It's like paper and fiber. That was one of the things that went through my head because I was curious on that. But yeah, really interesting.
Yeah. And then, Sean, you want to cover a little bit of how they worked a little bit more with Case?
Yeah, well, he was in contact with a case representative named Mr. Sanders, and they continued to do the rehandles on the cases until 41. And about that time, Case raised the minimum quantities, and I believe the case rehandles died up once all of those blades were gone. And the more popular from that were 2 trout knives with 4 and 5 inch blades.
Yeah.
And now, let's see, in 39, that's around the time that the blade stamp originally got ordered with the scimitars. And that guy got used until 1943. Did I segue into that awful?
No, it was good.
No, it's good.
I think, it's interesting, those 2 trout knives. I think those were the fin knives that we saw all the way up into the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
It's also interesting, in 1940, they figured up the production to date. And it was interesting that at that point, when they did the calculations, he had done 109 handmade knives and 128 factory rehandles. So he actually was doing more of the pimp work than of his actual custom knives.
But that's still just a ton of work.
That's a lot of work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's also
in 3 years,
when his
right?
first. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's in 3 years from the time he made his first knife or, finished the first knife with handles or whatever to having that kind of quantity. That's pretty significant.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I guess the question is like, one thing that I wondered, and I never saw it anywhere. Okay. So Al did all his forging for him, correct?
Yes.
Because I never read anywhere where Bo did any forging himself. Is that correct, or is that?
That's what I've seen. Now, if you look on the Randall website, it says that he had a forge and he forged his own stuff, but that's not what the book says.
I had a hard time figuring that out.
And the book actually has like invoices that were paid to Al and different stuff like that.
Yeah.
In the latter part of the story, where Gary came to work in the shop, his son, he talks about his dad forging blades, but that was later on, not in this early time frame, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that at one point or another that did get moved into the shop. I don't know exactly when that was, but it was later in the progression.
Yeah. They do talk about how the fellow that forged started working in the shop with him, when he started building production up.
Yeah, I think, when did they build their first new shop? I think it was in like the 40s during World War II. It's 1950s. They built a new shop, and they do specify when they built that shop that it did have a forging area. So at least in the 1950s, when they built that new shop, they were forging by that time.
Yeah. Now, yeah. Yeah, it's very interesting. I just want to know if but I think he just was just a great businessman. He knew what he wanted. He went looking for the guys that he knew would do the best work and said, here's what I want. Let's get this done. And I think that was kind of a good way of going about it.
Yeah.
Well, it feels a little bit like the, back to your comment, Birch, kind of contrasting with Skagel, which, is obviously kind of the key initial influence here. I think the picture we painted of Skagel based on the information we came up with was that he was almost more like a pure artist kind of guy, right? Where he had his own standards and it's like they were art pieces to him. And not that Bo didn't care how they looked. Obviously, there was a high level of fit and finish that was required, and they needed to meet certain standards and other stuff. But it felt like the approach was more along the line of, I'm going to develop a knife business, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
And the knives to go along with it. But definitely a different kind of approach. And I think realistically a model from many companies that would come along later on.
I think that's perfectly said, Mark, because I mean, you look at Skagel, he did all this other artwork too, the blacksmithing, the painting, all that stuff.
Yeah, I think
right, making tools and all that.
I think we're very much looking at two different types of people that kind of still had sort of the same impact on the knife industry today.
Yeah, got to the same place.
But very different. One guy wanted to do absolutely everything himself, very isolated. And I think we had another guy that wanted to create a good knife and make a knife business out of it. You know, and it's just very interesting. And the year was 1943 when he moved that Carl Christensen that came to work for him as his like full-time blacksmith. That's when he set up. Yeah, so he set 43. Up that sort of smithy in his backyard. And keep in mind, this is all done in probably the smallest shop you can imagine. It's kind of crazy. Like in that 43 or 42, whatever, he set up the smithy in his tool shed. And his main workshop was 10 by 12. And he had like, I think 3.
Yeah. It was like his
he had
garage.
Like 3 people in there, basically pumping out semi-production at that point. You know,
Well, in the 50s, when they build the new shop, it's 20 foot by 24.
Yeah, well, I bet that seemed like a huge thing by then, I bet. They probably had their arms stretched out, elbows all like a akimbo.
Didn't know what to do with themselves.
So that first shop, 10 by 12, is like a small one-car garage.
Yeah.
And 20 by 24 is a small 2-car garage.
Yeah, basically they have benches all the way around it, and there's people standing all the way around it working. Some of the old pictures.
Yeah, and I bet it was, you know, those old times, lots of people smoked. I bet it was just full of smoke and knife dust and stag smell and awesomeness.
Yeah, it sounds pretty cool. I could hang out
right?
Yeah. I mean, I was going to start off like, I bet it stunk, but then the more I talked, I was like, that sounds pretty awesome.
I'm down. Nobody's going to bitch at me smoking.
Sean just programmed himself a new time machine destination. So this is a good segue into the World War II thing, right? So, Tom, you want to talk about that part, the way this kind of went from being what realistically were sporting knives, right? Hunting knife kind of stuff prior to the war.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, like basically it's interesting when you look over, do an overview of Randall knives, but World War I or II, Korea, Vietnam, these were all huge impacts on the business. And basically World War II is where it all started, really. I mean, as far as like the knives of today, if you look at a catalog today, and it all started in June of 1942, you know, World War II's going, Bo volunteered to do some Civil Air Patrol. They actually went out, him and a friend went out and bought a plane. They were doing that. And, he was contacted by, Army Lieutenant James H. Zacharias. And basically Bo had been working on some all-purpose, fighting knife designs, and Zachary had some ideas, and they got together and they came up with what eventually became the Model 1. And, this was an amazing design for the time, and it was on fire during World War II. I mean, it literally put Randall knives on the map. The first one he made for him was a 7.5 inch, fighter. And then he made 3 more for Zacharias, that were, 8-inch knives. Interestingly enough, this knife was also at Blade Show. It was out front by the first one. To me, the Zacharias knife, you know, it kind of was the blending of the Skagel style Randalls and the new style Randalls, because it had a stag handle and it kind of was fancy, but it was all fighter. I mean, it look it up. It's a really sexy knife.
Yeah, it's a beautiful piece.
Yeah, lots of curves. And this is, I think, the beginning, really, to me, of Randall knives, of their own kind of look.
The thumbprint, 100%.
Well, in World War II is where the mystique really starts to take hold. A lot of these guys viewed the knife as a talisman. I mean, they were very serious about the knife they had on them.
And there's actually a couple really cool books. Let me grab one. So there's a couple of them, Randall military models, and there's volumes 1 and 2, and it's super cool because it's got all these knives, and they're the knives that were actually from that era that went to war and what they look like now. Really, really kind of neat. Definitely recommend those books if you're into the history.
Well, it was a different time. We were starting to warfare was stretching out, with some of the modern firearms. But at that point, it could be very up and close and personal. And you needed that knife. You relied on that knife to do what you needed to do. It was a fighting knife. Yeah, it was pure and simple.
And it was a tool also. This was an everyday tool. And it's interesting because, another thing that Randall does now that they started in World War II is basically, if you look at their catalogs back then, they were nothing like they are now. They had a Model 6 and 7, and it was basically fighting knives or hunting knives. And Bo would do what he called a commando. And basically that meant that hunting knife got a double guard and a sharpened swedge, and it was now a fighter.
Yeah.
So he did a bunch of those in World War II also. Well,
the same curve that can skin a deer is pretty good at, doing other stuff too.
Yeah.
It's a different kind of animal. As morbid as that sounds, it's the truth of what some of the stuff did.
Yeah, I think another thing that happened during World War II that to me really goes to the thumbprint of a Randall knife, that look, was they switched over to the stacked leather handles. Bo did a lot of research, and he found that a stacked leather handle, when it got wet, it got grippy. It was the most solid feel in the hand, and he switched over. And that, to me, a Model 1 and stacked leather, an 8-inch Model 1 stacked leather, is classic Randall look to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's potent medicine too.
Oh yeah.
Did you see that he wrote to the Marine Corps Equipment Board and submitted knives to them to be, official fighting knives of the USMC?
Right.
That would have been pretty badass.
Did he do that in World War II also? Yeah, he did it in the Korean War too. But yeah, this dude was thinking way ahead, man.
He was. And we saw this, earlier when he was doing his catalogs and approaching different companies to do, to carry his knives. And he got turned down quite a few times, but he kept at it, for catalog, or for, companies to carry his knives, like Abercrombie and Fitch or whatever. Which is, interesting enough, leads into the Loveless part of, when we do that one.
Right.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting, that it was such a big deal to be in the Brooks Brothers menswear catalog. Let's see, he was featured in the March-April issue in 1940, and that went to over 70,000 folks. And it featured hunters and letter openers, and they were all numbered from 1 to 14. And this pretty much started the model numbering system that we know today.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, from Brooks Brothers, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I didn't know that's where the model numbers came from. That's really cool.
And that's supposedly where that first, satisfaction guaranteed that they still do today was started. And one thing I didn't realize until reading about this was he made custom knives, as in somebody could order something from him to be custom made or from the company until the 1970s. That's a long time to be doing full on customs. I guess they weren't that, they didn't get a ton of requests or whatever, or maybe it wasn't that well known, but they did them.
Well, yeah, so another classic model that was designed during World War II was the Stiletto, which became the Model 2. And you could get that in a whole lot of different variations, from narrow, so it would be like Fairborn Sykes type blade, to wide, and then what ended up being the standard. But yeah, all different lengths and widths, and you look through some of these books and it's like, those are all the same model, but they look nothing alike.
Well, it seems like a lot of these, of his designs really were fighter specific at that point. And I think a lot of them were coming from other, military men, were saying, hey, this is what we want. This is what we're seeing. This is what we would like to see from you. And I think he really kind of took that and ran with it. Said, this is what they need. This is what I'm going to make. And did a, damn good job at doing and making them.
Yeah,
for sure.
Well,
after the start of World War II, military model knives were the bread and butter for Randall knives for pretty much the rest of the time.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's when he, was at 43 or whatever, he put together his, fighting knife booklet that came with the knives after that point.
It's a really cool booklet.
Made in association with Colonel Applegate.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so in all this time, he's been pumping out knives. And like I said, they were working in that 10 by 12 workshop. And it was just then at that point when they got that Carl Christensen, who basically was like, hey, I want a job. And they're like, we don't really, need it. But I guess he didn't leave and just stayed until he hired him.
You should talk about him and like Bill Platt's same time frame. Crazy.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it was like 43 when Christensen came on, and then 44 was when Bill Platt's, he basically just visited.
Yeah.
And I guess he'd been trained as an English cutler, and he just wanted to make Randall fighting knives. I mean, I think the mythos of Randall had kind of spread through the lines of the fighting men. And I think that's a big part of what made them grow so big. I mean, because you imagine being, in the military back then, you look over in the chest rig of some dude or on the belt and you see this badass knife, you're going to be like, what the hell? And you got some money, you're going to go buy one of these. And I think that's really what spread a lot of that, the knife, his, information about his knives around.
Yeah. I love the story of Bill Platts. He basically, like you said, was a trained cutler, and he just showed up, and Bo's like, we don't have space for you, and we don't really have anything for you to do. And he's like, that's okay, I'll work over here. And he just stayed for 35 years. I mean, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. The history of this, it's just it moved so fast between, that first of 36, 37 knife to 1944 and already basically being production.
Well, I mean, do you guys want to touch on the Springfield Randalls? Because that's this era too. And like we talked about, with the case production knives that are rehandled, this guy's thinking way far forward. This is basically small batch production.
Hit on it if you got it.
Oh yeah. Okay. So basically, during that time period, 1943-44, Bo Randall was approached by a gentleman, and he wanted to make Randall knives because Bo couldn't keep up. So, they started talking, and it got pretty excited, and that he was able to make the quality of knives that Bo wanted. But during the war, he had really hard time getting materials, and basically they didn't make a whole lot. And when you look in, like when you're walking through Blade, looking in the dealer cases, you'll see stuff and it'll say like a Springfield Randall, and they're actually really pretty rare because of the fact there just wasn't many of them made.
Yeah,
really neat addition to a collection. Well,
I think the fellow bit off a little bit more than he could chew on that one. I think he wanted to make the Randalls, but then when he realized how much work went into it, I think it was probably like, oh shit, and he just wasn't able to produce he wanted.
Yeah, and add to that wartime material supply issues, and there just wasn't many made.
Mm-mm.
I was going to say, in that time frame, I don't think you called up Aldo and got a pallet of steel show up at the shop, right? I mean, it didn't work like that.
It definitely didn't work that way.
Well, it still sounds like a cautionary tale on farming your workout, too.
Very much. And that wasn't even like farming. Well, I guess it was farming workout, but that was like a guy that I think actually approached him, wasn't it? I don't think he was.
He did. He was approached and was sold on it. He was only going to get 50 cents. Bo only got 50 cents per knife that he made.
And how many would you have the number offhand of how many he actually ended up being able to do?
Hold on, and I'll look it up. Hold on. I've got the book right here. Springfield Fighter 93. Yeah, I think it's interesting also in this time period, basically a guy wrote a letter to Bo and said, I love your stuff. I want to order some more. I want to be your Western representative. And that was Ronald Reagan.
Yeah.
Which is kind of cool.
That is cool.
So Bo was asking for 100 knives per month. And let's see, I'm trying to see how many he actually got. 63 knives delivered.
Huh.
By Dover 10. So that was the early order. He got 63 in October of 43 and then 200 more. So it looks like, I think that 263 were made if what I'm seeing is appropriate.
Wow.
If someone actually knows, you can correct us, but
that does make them pretty rare.
Yeah.
Maybe 200 finished. Somewhere in there, 200 to 260 or so.
Now, as a collector, what do you think is more important? The fact that they're rare, or the fact, or is like a Randall from Randall more collectible because it's, from the Randall shop?
These are actually pretty collectible on the, just I think from the fact that it's Randall memorabilia type stuff, and there's just not a whole lot of them out there. And I think there's probably less out there than even the numbers say, because these went to war, man. They got used up. So finding a good, because they were a less expensive way to get a Randall. So, how many are in good shape that are still around? Probably not very many,
Well, from what I remember,
right.
I think his biggest problem was finding someone to forge the blades for him.
Right.
And then let's not forget those knives are still forged, to this day, which is just crazy.
Yeah.
I think from a collector perspective, like Tom said, it's almost like, everybody collects different stuff, but it seems like if you were going to have a Randall collection where you were trying to hit key historic related pieces, for example, you definitely want to have one of those Springfield Randalls as like a little, boundary of the collection kind of thing, right?
It's part of the story.
You'd have to. But I think personally,
exactly,
I'd much rather have a Randall. Not that those aren't Randalls, but you know what I mean?
Well, it's interesting just as a World War II curiosity,
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
So we'll get those. Sean and Birch can just continue to look down his nose at us.
After World War II, I think the late 40s were pretty lean for Randall. I mean, it was
47 and 48 were referred to as the lean times.
Yeah.
Whereas the post-war in 46 saw a revival in the sporting knife line.
Correct. And this is when the Bird and Trout model was introduced. And also the Pro Thrower was added in that time period.
And
which I've never had a Pro Thrower, and I've always wanted one. I don't know why. I haven't got one yet.
You should get one.
I know.
And then to kick back to our 5 knives thing, had the Arkansas toothpick thrown in there.
Yep.
After the popularity of the Iron Mistress.
Yep.
So what's the so Bobby Branton owns that True Bow throwing knife thing, right? And he bought that from somebody.
Harry McAvoy, who was
Harry.
The connection with Skagel between Randall, right?
Yeah.
So
okay.
So that's where Randall was going through McAvoy to purchase Skagel's because he wouldn't sell to him.
Right. And when I was reading through that Randall book, there were throwing knife drawings, and they talked about true balance throwers. Yep. So I wondered if that was all kind of
he was a friend
somehow
of his.
daisy chained together.
Yeah. Harry was a friend of his, so 100%, I'm sure.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, this is all, basically True Detective knife style. It's all coming around. First season, not season 2.
Well, and also, the more we look at it, the more we see how they interlace, Randall,
exactly. That's what I was
Skagel.
Oh, yeah, very much. And it's all kind of like we talked about before, kind of a tree. We're at the root, kind of growing out.
All right, so we get up into the Korean War time frame, right? And what's the story there around the Korean War?
All right, well, the Korean War started in 50, and it really saw the tides turn for the fortune of the Randall factory, to the point where they had to have a new shop built to accommodate all the work coming in from the war. And this is also when they got their first power hammer in the shop.
There you go.
Oh, cool. I didn't realize that.
And now, by my notes that I took, the Model 4 was probably the most popular knife used during the Korean War.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
I made notation of that in my studies. I thought it was interesting, too. I figured it, would default to the Model 1, but no.
I wonder why. I wonder if someone out there knows the reason behind that. I'd love to know.
I've got that the Model 1 was a bestseller and the number 2 was close behind it. But that's the thing. It's the different stories. I know you could get the Model 4 set up as a commando.
Yeah.
Which is a really cool fighter. I've got one right here. If I can get it. It's got the swedge. So the Model 4 has a lot of belly, and that sharpened swedge is just really cool. I think the Model 4 Commando or the Model 3 Commando actually look more like the Zachary knife than a number 1.
Yeah, from the evolutionary standpoint, definitely.
And I think the 4 also has like a SOG look because it has the 3 curves kind of on it. The Model 4 fighter.
Yeah. Yeah, the Zachariah very much is a SOG kind of look.
That Model 4 swedge has got to be pretty long.
Yeah, it's a beast.
Yeah, it's probably on mine. I have what's a Model 4? I think it's a 6. Yeah, and it's probably a 3.5-inch swedge. But with the stacked leather and the shape of the blade, it reminds me of very much of a Vietnam era SOG.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it's got that Skagel feel to it, too. We saw Skagel's personal knife that featured that very similar spine shape.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Yep. Good point. Yeah, very sexy lines from Skagel.
That all had to kind of grow from there, I'd say.
But yeah, the 1950s, the Korean War and the 50s were huge for the Randall shop. Once again, the wartime demand for their fighters was unrivaled. I mean, this is what basically allowed them to grow and allowed them to get the help that they needed and start developing. Even after the Korean War, they started developing some new models that were going to be in their catalog even up to today.
Yeah, on the Randall website, it talks about how 1953 was a 78% increase in orders year over year from 1952.
Wow.
So yeah, huge spike, right?
Well, and 52 was probably doing pretty good already because that's 2 years into Korean War,
Yeah.
Right.
They built the new shop, which like we talked about before, 20 by 24 doesn't seem that big, but it also had a lean-to on it with the forging area or another room kind of on the side. So, this is a time of expansion for Randall knives.
Yeah, definitely growth years.
Yeah, very much.
And now in 52, Bo also saw the Iron Mistress, and that would lead to the Smithsonian Bowie, which is a pretty big deal.
Yep.
52 or 53?
Saw the movie in 52.
For some reason, I thought that movie came out in 53, and I have no idea why. Because my memory is not that great.
Now, a big thing happened in 53. Randall knives were featured in a magazine called True Magazine that was very widely read. And that did a lot for business also.
Huh.
Yep. The Google machine says the Iron Mistress came out in 1952.
Okay.
So for the people following along at home, the Smithsonian Bowie is the number 12.
Correct.
Yeah, we talked about this before, before we started this. Keeping track of the numbers can be very tough sometimes. There's a lot of them. Yeah,
the Bowies are to me the most confusing of the Randall knives because you've got, the Smithsonian, the Confederate, the Raymond Thorpe, the Big Bear, the what's the other one? There's a Camp Bowie or something. Or Sportsman's Bowie. So yeah, there's like 5 or 6 different designs that are all Model 12s, just different variations of it.
Yep, very good point.
And I picked up Raymond Thorpe at Blade Show, which, seeing them, I had no idea how it would balance, and I was amazed at how well it did balance.
Oh no, it's subtle quick for a knife that size.
Right?
Yeah.
I handled the Smithsonian also, and it felt really well balanced, even though it's a 3/8 inch blade. It felt well in the hand.
I could see that. And you got to take that for what it is. I mean, that's a big damn piece of steel.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to flip around like a feather.
No. I think one of the coolest things for me to come out of the 1950s are the Model 14, is the Model 14 and the 15. And this, once again, is Bo Randall going out and getting it, you know. He designed these specifically from the Marine Corps, took them to the Marine Corps board, and I mean, he was trying to get these made for the fighting man. He wanted them to have the best tool possible.
Very much. But it's also it's a big contract too. You know, business wise, it's a good move.
Yeah, I don't think he was going to make them, but I think he would probably get some royalty money. I don't think he could make them.
I don't know. It'd be interesting to know about that one. But yeah, it'd be pretty badass. It'd be awesome to kind of put on your knife belt, knife making belt.
Go on the resume.
Oh,
the resume.
You know, this is also the 14 and 15 is when they did the Solingen blades.
Mm-hmm.
You know, these were basically, once again, he was outsourcing. And, you know, the first ones he got, they looked great. And he did some destruction testing, and he was super disappointed because they just wouldn't hold up. And he basically sent them some stuff, changed this and that. They did some changes, still didn't hold up. They made some more changes, and finally they would meet his standards. And I think if I remember correctly, they got 500 of each model, the 14 and the 15.
It's very interesting, the difference of perception of outsourcing then and kind of now. We're kind of in this, you know, if you go have somebody do something for you or whatever, people kind of look down on it sometimes, you know, and then it was just kind of business. He was trying to make the best knife and trying to use the best people to do the parts. It's an interesting difference in perception of what people care about in their knife.
Yeah.
You know,
well, I think the big thing was Bo didn't give a crap what anybody else thought.
I think that's
as far as his peers, he was trying to get the best tool out there that he could.
Well, do you think any of his customers gave a shit that, you know, he outsourced those blades? I mean,
zero.
Yeah, it's just interesting.
I think they liked it because it allowed them to get a less expensive version, you know?
Well, yeah, and certainly for someone in the military, that makes a huge difference, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
very much.
And during the wars, you know, military people got preference. You know, they got first everything.
Mm-hmm. And I like that way of thinking.
Well, it still holds true with a lot of us today. That's carried on.
Yeah.
I think one of the themes that goes all the way through this thing is it seems very clear that Bo Randall is a very patriotic guy, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I mean, just top to bottom through this whole story, it's very strong.
And he was a super character. I mean, he thought outside the box. He went and did it, you know.
But didn't he get it?
You got to give him props.
Didn't he get an award when he was flying? I thought he.
Oh, in that Civil Air Patrol? I don't know. That would be awesome.
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I believe he did.
Let me check my notes real fast, but I'm pretty sure he did. He also crashed it, though. Crashed his plane.
Well, I hate when that happens.
That's another thing. He was a huge sportsman. You know, I mean, he was out fishing and hunting and doing all sorts of stuff. So his hunting and fishing knives show that influence.
Yeah,
I wouldn't hesitate to take any of them out in the field.
Purpose driven, very much for what they're used for.
It says here he received an air medal from Harry Truman.
Yeah, that's what it was.
That's awesome.
Check that out.
He crashed.
Harry S. Truman
crashed his float plane in 1943 when he was fishing with a buddy. So that had nothing to do with the civil.
Well, it was just right after it, though. I mean,
yeah.
Have you read that story? That what they were doing is they were fishing out of it. So they'd have a boat. They'd fly in, and they'd take off and go up and spot the fish, and then they'd land and coast to them. And when the fish were moved or whatever, they'd take off and spot them again and float into them.
Nice.
And they actually crashed when they were taken off once.
That's pretty funny.
Pretty interesting. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I bet he had a lot of good stories. I bet you sat there during an evening, you'd go home with a hell of a lot of good stories. It seems like a man who did a lot, and enjoyed a lot. Between
he lived life, and
yeah.
What's crazy cool is, there wasn't any email or anything, so people sent letters. So, if you take time to send a letter, it's pretty important, and it shows him, he saved most of this stuff. And in the book, it shows him in this huge floor space covered with correspondence, letters from people that used their knives in war, and it saved them. Really, really awesome.
That would be very humbling and very, if you had a problem not getting out to the shop, whatever, I'd say that'd get your ass out there.
Dude. Yeah. The 50s were pretty awesome because during that time period, a lot of the models that are in the catalog today were kind of developed from the 14, the 15, the diver's knife, all that stuff.
Tom, do you want to talk about the what those are, the 14 and the 15 for people? Because not everybody's going to know all these by the numbers.
So the Model 14 and the Model 15, basically the Model 14 is the attack and the 15 is the airman. And these are models that Bo designed for the Marine Corps. This was what he was trying to take to the Marine Corps. And these are heavy duty knives. The 14, I think, let me turn real quick just so I don't lie. The 14 has I want to say it's a 7-inch blade, but yeah, 7.5-inch blade. These are 1/4-inch stock, and they also have this extra heavy duty 7/8-inch top to bottom tang that goes through the handle. So these things are like heavy duty pry bars, right? And then the 15 is an airman, and it's a 5.5-inch blade. So it's designed, if you're in an armored vehicle or airplane or something like that. And these were super heavy duty knives. They became very popular later on.
Awesome.
Coming up in 1959, probably one of the biggest projects ever was the Astro project. And I think one of you guys wanted to talk about that.
Yeah, so maybe this is kind of a good segue to switch over unless we have other specific history stuff we wanted to talk about. So one of the things we wanted to do was kind of each sort of pick a model and then talk about a little bit of the history about it or what's cool about it or why we like it. So the Model 17, which it was later known as the Model 17, is the knife that Tom's referring to. So in late 1959, Gordon Cooper and Bill Douglas, these are two guys who are pretty important as far as American space exploration goes. Gordon Cooper was one of the Mercury 7, one of the original Mercury 7 people that were identified to be part of the Mercury program. So he was one of the Mercury astronauts. And Bill Douglas was an Air Force doctor who was on leave working for NASA, and he was basically the doctor for the Mercury 7 crew. And so each of the Mercury 7 astronauts had sort of a side project assignment thing where they had to go develop some part of the spacecraft or some technology or some feature that they needed on the capsule. And so,
which I think is really pretty cool.
That is super cool.
I mean, that doesn't happen today.
No.
Right. So these two guys show up at the shop in late 1959 and start talking to Bo about needing a special mission knife, like a survival knife, that they were going to take in on the Mercury capsule. And as soon as Bo kind of realized that he was talking to a Mercury astronaut, he got super, super excited and interested. And so, like Tom said, this is something that clearly Bo got very, very into, is the idea of sending a knife into space and supporting this whole early NASA program. Yeah, how cool would that be?
Yeah.
So they had apparently heard about Randall knives through Scott Carpenter. Scott Carpenter was another one of the Mercury 7 guys, and I think he was probably he was sort of known as a more flamboyant, outgoing kind of a astronaut guy. and he had a Model 3 Hunter with stag handles, and he had showed it off to the astronauts as this, hey, look at this cool knife I got. And that's what got Gordon Cooper interested in talking to Bo. And so they had this conversation, and they realized that what they were looking for was actually pretty similar to the Model 15 Airman knife that Tom just talked about, but they needed to make a number of changes to it, or wanted to. And so that turned into I'm going to say a couple year development process of going back and forth about what to do. And so it was similar to a Model 15 with some changes to the blade shape, basically like a reground 15 with where the tang had a cutout to have some storage in it. And this is kind of I guess an early version of like a hollow handle knife, but instead of having a cap on the end, you would either, instead of scales or handles, you might wrap the handle with some tape or with some fishing line or with something that you can use. And then inside the hollow, you would have, fishing hooks or
tang,
matches or whatever. And so that
tang
inside, I'm sorry, what did I say?
No, tang was in it. That's a space joke.
Yep. Tang the drink.
Tang the drink.
Tang powder. Tang in the tang. I'm going to leave that in and let you live with that.
I wanted to be an astronaut when I was a kid because I heard they get all the tang they want.
Oh,
that stuff was amazingly good.
Yeah.
Nice
so,
tangent.
Dad joke aside.
Proud of that one.
Yeah. This is where Cullen is cringing. Dang, Dad,
He
why'd
just
you
gave
have
his
to go
dad a
there?
high five.
It may be. It's possible. So anyway, this whole design thing evolved big time. It started out as double edge, where the swedge was sharp. They needed a way to be able to cut the spacesuit open, and so they had kind of this unusual arrangement with a guard that could flip down to protect the upper edge, so that you didn't cut into the astronaut when you're trying to get him out of the suit in case of an emergency.
Yeah, that one was just for the doctor, right?
Yeah.
And I think, at least the way I read it initially, that was it was in the initial design that the mission knife itself would have a double edge, and then they ended up putting the guard on for the doctor. And in the end, the doctor's knife kind of became its own thing.
Yeah, very unique piece.
Right. And so Bill Douglas, the guy I mentioned earlier, the doctor for the Mercury 7 crew, he ended up with his own special version of the knife that did have the double edge with a guard for the blade. And then this kind of unique thing where there was basically a shroud cutter kind of hook that would flip out of the end. And they only made one of those knives, and apparently it was a huge pain to make that. So the folks at Randall were very happy when they decided they didn't need that in the rest of the astronaut knives. So there were kind of two parts to this. There were some custom knives, custom forged knives that were the astronauts' personal knives. And then there were some contract knives that NASA was buying for mission stuff that were the Solingen blades. And so they're really two separate things, but basically on the same kind of pattern or design. And so, but it turns out in the end, Bo didn't charge NASA for these knives or the little sharpening hones that went in the sheaths. He considered it kind of his contribution to the space program. And I think what they more or less settled on was a knife that had bolt-on micarta handles. And the inside of the micarta handle was cut out with a slot or a hollow to add to that internal storage space for survival stuff. And then it had a leather lanyard on it with a little flathead screwdriver to be able to use to take the handles off.
Pretty cool knives.
Yeah, super cool knives.
If you haven't seen one, Google it up, after you listen to this podcast or while you're listening to it, because they're amazing looking.
Yeah, and well, it's just such a cool thing, and it's like, I don't think Bo actually charged the space program for those knives. I don't think.
Right, that's what I was just saying. He didn't charge them for it. He considered it his contribution to the space program.
Yeah,
so
that's awesome.
Very cool.
Well, and I think these, he was in Florida, and apparently they would come up to his place a few times and hang out.
There was supposedly they all showed up one time, but they did not get a picture of it. It's just like that. That makes me kind of sad. How awesome would that have been?
Yeah. Well, I mean, just imagine.
There are some pictures of them
being in Bo's shoes at this time.
Not all of them.
The space race was huge. Everybody was keeping up with it. And to be chosen, I mean, he's
Kind of
no
a
dummy.
big
He
deal.
knows the marketing opportunity that it is.
Well, yeah. I want one solely for that reason.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And so it sounded like he was really fascinated, as any of us would have been, with being exposed to and involved with these guys. So he became friends with many of these Mercury 7 guys because he made knives for them. There ended up being these 7 custom knives, one for each of the Mercury 7 astronauts. They each had their name on it and the Mercury mission logo on the blade. And they all have a little bit different grind to them. And there's a real cool collection picture where there's a shot of all 7 of them in one spot. And I'll try to remember to post that to the Facebook group.
And I think one of them is missing, right? Didn't one of them get misplaced on the capsule and went missing forever?
I don't know.
Yeah. They're actually, so
John
two
Glenn.
of the,
John Glenn's is the one that went missing, I think. Maybe not. I don't know.
2 of the original NASA order knives, the Solingen blades, 2 of those were lost. So Alan Shepard had one. These were the, the regrind knives, not the custom forged knives. So Alan Shepard had one out of that, the reground batch that was in a survival kit that is attached to the hatch. And so on Alan Shepard's flight, they jettisoned the hatch, and the hatch is at the bottom of the ocean. So one of those is gone.
Yeah, that's it.
There's another one where Gus Grissom, there's this famous story about Gus Grissom and whether he could swim or not and all kinds of craziness. But anyway, in that situation with Gus Grissom where the capsule actually sank, they also lost one there. So out of that, there were a batch of 20 that were, contract knives. And then there were these 7 special personal knives that were done. So 2 of the contract knives got lost that way.
Okay.
Now, Scott Carpenter's knife might be the knife that you're thinking of, Tom. Scott Carpenter was the first guy to take one of the customs to space and back. And that one went missing or got stolen or whatever.
Yeah, that's the one.
I don't think it's been found since, but Bo replaced it with another one with Scott's name on it and some other stuff. So it's very cool of Bo to do that for him. Gordon Cooper, the guy that was the original astronaut that came to Randall to have this whole conversation about developing this special model for the Mercury team, he did take his personal hand-forged knife on his flight, which was the very last flight for the end of the Mercury mission. So he went around the Earth 22 times, 34 and a half hours with this Randall Custom, which is really cool, and brought it back. And he and another guy showed up at the shop, and he was by that point very close with Bo, and he gave it back to Bo as a thank you. And so that's actually, now that Bo has passed, that knife is on display in the Randall Museum.
Oh, that's super cool.
Yeah.
So that was his favorite thing. It was never on display until after he passed. His wife wanted it to be in the museum because she said this thing was super special to him, maybe his all-time favorite knife, because it had this rich provenance where it had actually been out in space and came back. And he was very overwhelmed by that whole experience, as any of us would be.
Imagine you're having a dinner
be?
party and someone's
awesome.
like talking about something. You're like, hold on, I'm going to show you something. Pull that son of a bitch out and start telling the story.
Right. So for Bo, it's some knife that went around the Earth. Mine, it's the American Shooter video. It's the same kind of story, right?
Except it seems like he's got story after story like that.
No, I know. I'm just
kind of
teasing.
crazy.
Yeah, it is amazing. So what's interesting about all this is all the way through this time and on the invoices, I say invoices for $0 to NASA, the paperwork to NASA, these were referred to as a special version of the Model 15. And so after this whole thing happened and they produced these knives, the Astro, they were referred to it as the Astro, like the Model 15 Astro version. It was in the catalog for a few years as one of their world famous knives that they kind of pictured in the catalog as, hey, look at some cool stuff that we've been doing at Randall Knives, but it wasn't available for sale. And then I think 3 years later, they actually finally called it the Model 17, gave it its own model number. So the Model 17 Astro, and then started to offer it for sale.
Well, everybody asked for one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So now there was some stuff that went on later with the Gemini program where they actually requested and ordered some knives for the Gemini program. There was another knife that came along later that's another tie back into case, where they wanted it like a machete style knife and also like a funky looking folder with a sliding handle. And Randall kind of begged off on that stuff and sent him to Case to do, to work on those projects. But they did provide knives, those same reground Model 15s with micarta handles that are hollow inside. They did provide those for the Gemini program as well.
And I think they made was it a Bowie axe or something for the Gemini program?
Yeah.
Kind of reminded me of some of the Harry McAvoy throwers. I think he made a similar model that was a throwing knife, but
it was cool. A pretty big knife.
Yeah, space machete seems a little excessive. I mean, you're
chopping up aliens, man.
You're worried about every single ounce you're taking, into space, and to use up a lot of it on, some big chunks of metal.
Right.
Pretty crazy.
Well, and it sounds like when they had that conversation about the Gemini program, they wanted a thin blade for exactly that reason. They wanted a long blade. They wanted it thin. They wanted it saw back and some other stuff. And Bo said, no, that's not really what you want because it's not going to be strong enough. What you really want is this thing. What did you call it, Tom? I can't remember the name. Something
It's
axe.
like a Bowie axe.
Yeah. It's kind of like a big, long chopper looking thing, right?
Yeah.
And, but it was thick material and some other stuff. So he made some, he sent one off to Gordon Cooper and maybe another one to somebody else. And, but I think in the end, Case ended up producing knives that were part of the support for the Gemini mission. But on these Model 17 Astros, so there's one in the Randall Museum that was the one that Gordon Cooper took out and back. But then there are two, I assume, of the NASA contract knives that are on display in the Smithsonian. One that's in the Mercury Freedom 7 capsule kit, like attached to the survival kit, like it was when they flew, and then one on display on its own. And again, I'll try to put the link to that. There's a pretty cool special spot on the Smithsonian website that shows a picture of that knife. So
it's pretty awesome.
So it's kind of interesting. Right during that program, Gary Randall started becoming a full-time member of the team. He started working full-time at the shop. And so did Pete Hamilton.
So for the kids at home, Gary is Bo's son, right?
Yep. Yeah, that is, so basically second generation is coming on board in the early 1960s, full-time. Gary had worked, for years in the shop, part-time like my kids do. But yeah, it was a big deal coming full-time.
Oh, he helped work on one of my favorite knives, the 18.
Yep.
So, Michael, why don't you tell us about the Model 18?
You like that segue? I was proud of it. Well,
I didn't like the pregnant pause, but I like the segue. Well done.
Thank you. Well, okay, so around 63, Bo got a letter from a Captain George A. Ingram. He was in the Army. He was a helicopter pilot. And he basically wanted a really kick-ass knife. He was talking about the airmen going down in the jungle in Vietnam. And he wanted something more of a, a little bit of mix of hand-to-hand combat and kind of a survival knife. In a way to kind of like signal aircraft and all this stuff. And he wanted to be basically like a real crazy version of the Model 14 attack. But he wanted saw teeth that could, cut aluminum, plexiglass, etc. The idea is to kind of be able to cut your way out of, the skin of an airplane. A big old brass guard, and originally he wanted it to be like a full, like half circle, kind of like a knuckle duster, which how cool would that have been?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And he also wanted like a screw-on butt plate, which we're all familiar with now, but I mean, back then they're probably like, huh? He wanted something you could put basically your matches, your water purification tablets, your, Demerol for burns and whatever you need to put in there. So he put that in his, in his brain and thought about it for a while. He said it, and he got back with him and said, the idea of it looks good, but we can't quite make that. That they hadn't learned how to put saw teeth in at that time. But he could not get it out of his mind, so they kept working on it. And he got his son Gary to get on it with him, and that's when they started really discussing this kind of survival knife concept. And they got their heads together and put together pretty much the design, which became the Model 18. And what they ended up doing originally was it was a little too expensive to do your screw-on butt cap. So what they ended up doing to make it waterproof and sort of comfy was what they call the crutch tip, which pretty much how the name implies what it looks like. You know, the end of a crutch has that rubber that goes on. They had this kind of black rubber thing that would pop on the end. So it would keep everything in there waterproof. And you wouldn't have something that was so heavy. So, but years later, they ended up actually putting these on. But I mean, this was a very popular knife during Vietnam War. It was kind of a crazy, survival knife type of thing that was very appealing. It kind of could do everything. And he gave this captain the first one basically for coming up with the design, the idea of it for free. So it's just very interesting. It's one of my very favorite Randall knives. It hits that survival knife thing, but in the realistic side of it, as opposed to sort of the Rambo stuff where it's sort of a romanticized, knife. This is once again a purpose-driven knife that was built and designed by, an aircraft fellow that needed it and wanted it, and it got used.
The guy that requested it was a helicopter pilot or worked on a helicopter or something, right?
Yeah, he was an Army guy.
Now, would this be the first example of the modern hollow-handled survival knife as we know it?
I believe so.
That was going to be my point, yeah. I agree, Sean, 100%. This is the influence, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't been able to track it back any farther, and I've actually tried a little bit.
Well, it's like the idea...
Where in the heck where did this guy come up with this idea? It's crazy.
Yeah, that's the part that gets me is, I remember when I first got into like the Randall stuff and seeing the old crutch tips, I assumed they just hadn't thought of the threaded, nut at the end. No, I didn't realize that, the original design had called for a threaded, nut for the compartment. They just didn't quite have the capabilities then, or didn't want the extra weight and cost of doing it. So it's crazy. I don't know where that dude came up with that. But pretty awesome.
Man, do you think maybe he had seen theater knives? Theater knives from World War II, done on board ships and job shops, machine shops. I could have seen them putting together maybe a knife with a tube for a handle, not necessarily with storage in mind, but just because that's what they had.
It's highly possible that some ship mechanic or sub mechanic, was like, hey, we got this tubing, let's put some shit together. Anything's possible.
Yeah, we've got this spring steel, let's make a knife.
Mm-hmm.
What you're talking about, Sean, is a knife that maybe some guys made out of some maintenance equipment, like a pipe section, and where it got pieced together by guys more or less in the field or away from home.
Yeah, theater knives are a pretty rich topic. During World War II, you had guys on boats or on the land, and in their downtime, if they had downtime and the materials to do it, you had guys crafting some really nice knives. I mean, some of them, they were crude, but they were functional, but there were some very nice knives that came out of that.
Kind of the knife version of trench art. They would make their own.
Yeah, I was just going to say World War I.
Yeah. Very big, not always big, but very cool kind of their own expression sort of knives.
I love the shrapnel ones from World War I.
Oh, the trench art? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, God.
Yeah, those are so cool.
It's very... depressing type of art. It's beautiful in sort of a dark way.
Yeah.
Well, and that's what this original sketch for the 18 kind of looked like, right? It was sort of a survival trench knife.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, basically.
With that big guard on the front.
Yeah,
for sure. With the D guard.
Man, that would have been a beast if that had been how they actually ended up making it, with a big old trench thing on the front.
Right.
Or, what if that was, maybe it came from the idea of the 1918. Maybe he saw the cast handle and was like, what if that shit was hollow?
Maybe. Yeah, you're going to be running something through it to attach it anyway. You've got that hollow area you could utilize. Who
Yeah.
knows?
Yeah, you never know.
Hey, if anybody knows, let us know.
Yeah. No kidding.
Well, and I kind of back to the thing about using the rubber cap on the end versus something threaded. So I like you said, I remember reading that there was, capability issues with that within the shop. And at the same time, if I remember right, wasn't the price like $28.50?
Right on the money on that one.
Yeah. So it was $28 knife. And the initial feedback when he sent the first two of them over to the guy in the field was, because he was shopping the idea, right? Like, hey, I made this and here's an extra one for you to show around. And if you guys want to order some, let me know. And it seems like the note that came back was, yep, the guys really like them and it's kind of expensive, but the quality's really good. And, but not a lot of guys have extra money or whatever to be able to spend $28.50. So, I mean, different time frame, different dollar amounts mean a different thing. But, from a cost perspective, it makes sense, right? That you couldn't probably go there with some of the stuff that he really wanted to do and make it even remotely affordable if 2850 was strong for guys.
Yeah. Well, originally it was going to have a brass pipe, but it was heavy. So that's how they end up with the stainless tubing.
Super, super iconic.
Yeah. It's a phenomenal knife. I've actually got it in my hand right now.
Wow. Look at you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm jealous.
As well you should be.
Sean, what's your favorite?
The Model 1 easily. I mean, that knife just really does it for me. It hits on all cylinders. It's a piece of Americana. It's a usable knife. There's a romanticism to it. It's just a fantastic piece. And I mean, it's got a wonderful history behind it, a rich history. The original shop note for the build was listed as one special made Jap sticker for Lieutenant Zacharias.
Yep.
And that's quoted from the thing. That's not...
Yeah, that's a direct quote from the correspondence. And, I mean, it symbolizes the all-American clip point at this point. I mean, if you think of a clip point knife, there's a pretty good chance you're going to be thinking of the Randall Model 1 profile.
Mm-hmm.
How big was that original knife? What was the blade length or the overall, did it say?
7.5.
I was going to say 7.5, I believe.
Okay.
For the first one, and then he ordered 3 more with an 8-inch blade.
I think that for our 20th episode anniversary, we should all buy ourselves a new Randall.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm down for that.
Yep.
Of course, I got one in the mail yesterday, but yeah, I'm down.
Yeah, I'm down.
Well, I think their current wait list is listed as 5 years or something, right?
Yeah, 5.5.
No, I bet we can track them down.
So I think the Model 1, if I remember right, when I was reading about that Vietnam era, the Model 18 got popular, but the Model 1 was the best seller for a long, long time, right? Even through most of, or at least the first half of the Vietnam War, right?
I'd say it probably still is. I'd say that Model 1 takes them all.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say the Model 1 has more Model 1s have gone to combat than any other custom knife ever.
I'd say that's a fair bet right there.
I think that's safe, yeah.
I mean,
you might even be erring on the side of caution with that statement.
I mean, it's been going to war since World War I. And it's been in every conflict since.
Yeah, I think...
You mean World War II?
Yeah, sorry, World War II. Good catch. That's what I meant.
It's been in every war since the Civil War, Sean.
That's where the D-Guard comes from. The Confederates love that shit.
Going to be issued to the Space Forces.
There you go. Exactly.
Dude, I have been fighting not to mention Space Forces since we started the talk on the Astro.
I tried real hard.
That is so cool. Yeah.
So somewhere I think maybe in the latter part of the massive troop buildup portion of Vietnam, I think the 14 took over as the most popular one for a little while. But I think up until that point, all of those years and conflicts and buyers and soldiers prior, it was the Model 1. But I think somewhere in there, the 14 really caught on.
And the 18 was almost as popular as the 14.
Right.
Crazy.
which is really cool.
What about you, Tom? Which one do you like to cover? What's your favorite?
There's so many. I mean, there's so many that I like, but really, I decided to go a different direction from the rest of you guys because
we chose first.
Randall not
because
only
we chose first.
What's that? No.
6 times out of 10, it happens every time.
I'd be totally fine pretty much talking about any of the Randall knives. And you guys all picked. And honestly, I wanted to show that Randall has a pretty cool line of hunting knives too. I've had Model 7 Fisherman's, the Bird and Trouts, all that, but I'd never had a Bushmaster. I wanted one really bad. It's the Model 19. And I got one this week, and I've got to say this may be one of my favorite designs of all time. It's literally everything a knife should be to do pretty much anything, I've got a 5-inch model, which the first ones were all 4.5-inch models for quite a while. And they always looked and felt stubby is what they said. And they lengthened it out to 5 inches. And this is a knife. It's 1/4 inch. It's got probably a 2.5-inch sharpened swedge. So pretty cool knife. History wise, this was, designed in 1962, also right after, Gary had come full time. So same era as the 18, that you picked, Birch. He had a friend that was a good sportsman, Norm Sherwood, and Norm came over and they designed this knife. And the early one looked much different. The early Bushmaster looked much different than the one they're making now. It had a ton of belly. Like it almost looked like an ulu almost. It had so much of a belly on it. And even though it worked really well, no one at the shop liked the way it looked. So Norm got the bush knife that he wanted. He wanted one that was stout, that he could chop, tendons and stuff with the back spine and skin with the main primary edge. And by all accounts, it worked really well. But like I said, they didn't like the way it looked. And so they redesigned it. And the new one to me is just a beautiful knife, especially the 5-inch version. If you haven't seen one, I recommend taking a look at it.
So Tom, you said that knife is, the model is the 18 or is it the 19 or the 18? Right. And these are all kind of, in the end, these numbers are in order for the most part, right?
Right.
So from a time frame perspective, it's around the same time as the 18. You said early 60s, mid 60s?
Yeah. Same era, like 1962, right after Gary was working in the shop. So it would have been the exact same time.
Okay.
And it's pretty cool because in the 1960s and 70s, they redesigned a lot of the knives, and the Model 19 was one of the knives that they redesigned, and it's a very classic, iconic hunting knife shape. If you've seen the Blackjack Trail Guide that came out in the 90s, I mean, it's basically almost an exact copy of that.
That's a good point. I never really put the 2 and 2 together on that one, but you're right on that.
Yeah, it's very, very close.
You mean they didn't license that?
Design. It's slightly different, but this is definitely where they got the inspiration from.
I always assumed that was sort of I don't know. Yeah. Interesting.
I just assumed it was a licensing agreement thing because it was so close.
No, and Blackjack made a version of the Model 1 also. They made a version of the Model 14, but I don't think there was any licensing.
Interesting.
So yeah, the 60s and 70s for us today. I mean, if you look back at the catalogs from that era, very similar to the catalogs today. There are some changes, and now you can go online, order stuff that way. I do think it's interesting that they limit orders now. You can only order, I think, one knife every 3 months per household. And you put a deposit down, and in 5 to 5.5 years, you'll get to pay the rest of the statement and get your knife.
I wonder if they had to deal with like some of the first versions of sort of flipping and working with, that sort of secondary, because, growing up and all that stuff, someone having a Randall knife was a pretty big deal. Like, if someone was hunting with one, it was a big deal.
Yeah.
And it was a status symbol.
Yeah, exactly.
When they hold their value really well.
And have for a very long time, which is, it's sort of a great thing to look at as a knife maker and as a business or whatever you want to call my knife making. It's great to see what they're doing and knowing that they've been doing it for this long. It's like a staple in the community.
Well, yeah, talk about staying power. I love it. They're in their third generation, basically Gary started buying the business in 1976, and he finished off the payments in 1986, and it was his. And, his boys are working there now. I called down there the other day and I got to talk to one of them. Mike and Jason run Randall Knives now, third generation.
That's cool.
Yeah. If you're listening,
that's pretty awesome.
Keep up the good work, because it's pretty awesome.
Well, I talked to Mike and he was like, yeah, I listened to the podcast, which to me was super humbling and also made this episode a bit more nerve wracking.
Well, yeah. No pressure.
Man, glad you didn't tell me that before we started recording.
Yeah. Sorry, Mike.
Hopefully we did you guys proud. Bo passed away in 1989, and on Christmas Day. So yeah, that was a passing of a legend right there.
Yeah.
But thankfully his company is keeping on.
He still casts a shadow over the knife community to this day.
Well, that's part of one of the great things about the knife making and doing what we do. We're all going to get to that point at somewhere, but hopefully the things we make will just keep going for years and years and years, if we do our job right.
Well, yeah, I'm sure, I know you guys do too, because, at the show you came home with a few lums, and, I love looking in those cases, and I'm not so much drawn to the newer stuff as the older stuff, the Rick Tigs, the Nichols, the older Randalls and the Lyles and that kind of stuff. And to me, that's the heritage that the Instagram age just doesn't really understand. And that's, I feel, why we're doing some of this.
Yeah, but I also find that there's social media is catching up to history, which is fantastic. I love seeing that, because I started seeing older pieces, and when I posted, I think a lot of people know about Lum, but I've also seen some kind of obscure pieces get posted, and people being like, "Oh, that's pretty badass." I think people are starting to recognize, and which is it's fantastic to see.
Yeah, I love it.
Well, and I think, that's kind of back to the legacy point you were making earlier. The collector scene around Randall Knives going very, 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 very far back is crazy strong. Right. So, that kind of, that fits with the whole idea of what we've been trying to get across is how important to the knife timeline the whole Randall Knives legacy really is, right? And I think for collectors and makers that are newer to the scene, that coming into the episode didn't know a lot about Randall, and maybe still don't, based on our attempt to try to help. It's interesting to note, if you look around at Blade Show or even your local knife shows, you're likely to see people who are there displaying Randall knife collections. And
how cool is that?
Exactly.
I don't see very many people having collections just for display, not for sale, of many makers. And if you go to Blade Show, you're going to see a bunch of Randall, collectors with their wares out for people to see.
and they want to talk to you about them. So ask them. You know, they are a wealth of information.
Right. And happy to talk about it.
Yep.
Yeah. So, you know, Tom was very helpful and sent around a copy of the book for us to check out. You want to remind folks the name of the book that we used largely for the reference for the show, Tom?
So it's the book by Bob Gaddis, and it's Randall Made Knives, The History of the Man and the Blades. I've also used a couple other books. There's actually a pretty good one by Dominic Bucant called The Randall Saga. And then there's several. Another cool one, if you get a chance, it's by Pete Hamilton called The Randall Chronicles. And it's pretty cool because it basically walks you through how they make them. It shows you every stage and knives in progress and all that. So if you like work in progress stuff, that's a really good book. But,
awesome.
Well, and wasn't Pete the shop foreman for quite a while?
He was for like 30 years or more.
30 plus. Yeah, that's what I thought.
There's so much history there. There's no chance we did it justice, but hopefully we lit a fire that's going to set you guys off on a journey of exploration.
And there's a lot of exploring to do. We did not even come close to scratching the surface.
Right.
Well, and you can find these knives, eBay or wherever you like to buy knives. You'll find them around for, affordable money, in today's market, if you're into like the modern tactical knives and whatnot. These are very buyable knives.
I just got this. I bought this Model 19 off of eBay for $415. It's good shape.
You're buying a piece of history. Usable piece of history.
I'm gonna use it.
One of the things we should probably mention, we met a guy named Aaron Johnson at Blade Show, came around and talked to, I think, all of us. You talked to him as well, right, Tom?
Super good.
Man, I didn't get to meet Aaron in person, and I regret that.
Oh, okay.
Good friend of mine.
Yeah, I needed to give him a shout out. I called and talked to him at length, and he was a wealth of knowledge and just really enthusiastic. Shit, he made me wanted to uproot and go get a job in the Randall shop.
Dude, wouldn't that be cool? I would. Yeah.
They wouldn't want me as an employee.
I've thought things like, I've thought stuff like that too. I mean, if you didn't have to make a living, how cool would it be to just, hey, can I come over to your shop for a month and just help you out make knives that'd be fun.
Tom, you could be like that guy where they said, no, wait, we don't really need you to be here. And you just said, no, I'll be over here in the corner, grinding away.
Yeah. Don't
I'd
mind
be like
me.
that
I'm just
Elf
right
movie.
here.
Everyone else have like a pile of 15 on their stack, and I'd have like half of a guard sitting on mine.
So high five to Aaron for coming to talk to us. He's a huge fan of the show, a strong supporter of what we're trying to do with the show. He came around and gave us some copies of the Knife News, the Randall Knife Collectors Club flyer, which was excellent for us to see. If you get a chance, check that out as well. And again, high five to Aaron for helping us out with some information and being a great contact and an excellent ambassador for Randall. He loves the brand, the company, what they're all about. And I think he does a fine job representing.
Absolutely.
No doubt, dude. You couldn't ask for a better employee. Really.
Yeah. Good stuff.
All right. So what, we're at post Blade Show. We got, it makes me want to put up a Gathering Vegas show countdown clock for Birch every time we have this conversation. But like whatever the next show is, just flip the name over and start the timer. What's going on in the shop? What do you got going on, Tom, since Blade Show?
Basically, I came back and got to work. It's kind of crazy in the shop right now because my two older boys are working in the shop pretty much every day. And Zach, my youngest son, is wanting to come and pimp some of the CRKT gung hos. So he's up here. And then I've got two other employees. So basically we're all in this tiny shop. I feel like I'm at Randall Knives, original shop sometimes. But we're just jumped back in. We're making some fixed blades. Trying to catch up on a few knives that I had, like I do Have It Your Ways and stuff like that. So we're trying to get those out. The biggest thing is a CNC. We're actually starting to get close to being able to cut parts. We've got tooling and cutters, and we just ordered a vise. And yeah, hopefully we'll be cutting some parts in the next week or two.
So you're officially past the refrigerator magnet storage vehicle phase?
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. That's kind of nerve-wracking also.
Yeah, I bet.
It will be less so once we're making some parts on it.
Yeah. So what are you planning, Tom? What are you going to do when you start making parts? Are you cutting profiles for fixed blades to start, or where are you going with it?
Yeah, I mean, we didn't want to jump in on a folder project. I've got 3 folder projects that I want to move forward with, but we want to try to learn the machine a little bit. So we're going to start making the Cicada neck knife. It's a knife designed from several years back, and we've only made them in 3V steel at this point, and we haven't made any in probably 5+ years. So we're going to start doing some small runs of those in different steels, just to play with the machine. We're going to try to do a 2D chamfered version, and then eventually we're going to try to, start taking away some of the blade stuff. They're still going to be ground by hand, but we'd like to take away about half the grunt work there and make it where it's easier to grind. So yeah, we'll see what happens.
Nice. Cicada's a really cool, super handy little guy.
Yeah, thanks.
So,
that's what I'm up to.
Not like that shitty Jack Turner special that Birch has in his kitchen.
True story. I know. Well, and it's also summertime, so we're trying to find time to spend with, I've been out on the creek a couple times with the boys, and, we're planning a trip down to Florida and stuff like that. So.
Awesome. How about you, Sean? What you got going on?
I've been working on an ironwood ruiner for the past, it's been my main focus for 2 weeks. Hopefully we'll have it done either tomorrow or the next day. And big thanks to Michael and Tom, because the ironwood would be in the fucking trash if it wasn't for them. They talked me down off the ledge.
It's a work in progress. Picks, and it looks good.
Man, it turned out good. A big lot of thanks to you with the super glue tip, and it just took more handwork than I was expecting, and I ended up, my final bit was hitting it on I've got a stitched cotton buff that I loaded up with white compound, and that really popped the grain really hard, got it to where I wanted it to be.
Nice.
Yeah, I wish I'd have had a loose buff, but, wish in one hand and shit in the other.
How about you, Birch? What you got going on down there?
Kind of the same stuff. I really got to get on the V4s. I've been drawing basically the fixture plates just for that. There's a whole bunch of fixture plates you got to make. One to make holes in it and one to do something else. But then I got an inset lock stuck in my head. So I ended up designing that shit. And
that looked great.
Making one.
Really that did turn out really nice.
I still got to grind the blade, but right now it's at 3.2 ounces, and I think it's going to be real light. It's got venting and all sorts of stuff, so it should be real. Inside of that Damacor stuff. So I think it'll be a fun piece. Picked up that.
It's going to be.
What's that?
It's going to be Jerry light.
Very much.
Jerry McGinnis light.
Yeah. Very much. That carbide rotary platen thing. So been jacking with that. It's interesting.
What do you think?
It's flat grinding that seems a bit easier, but I also don't flat grind a ton.
Dude, it's flat grinding is hard. I think.
One thing I realized, it completely slowed down my KMG with a 2 horsepower on it. It's moving, basically that conveyor belt or whatever.
More friction.
Yeah. And trying to do like a full flat, it's a ton of friction you're adding to it.
Is your KMG direct drive or pulleys?
No, they're pulley.
Yeah.
But yeah, it basically I could stop it. So I had to modify the Uber to fit that. But I ordered up some of that AEBL and some 1/8 inch to do some little fun kitchen knives out of.
I love that steel.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good excuse to get out of my comfort zone and do some real thin slices.
Hard to beat for kitchen knives. Great stuff.
Yeah. Well, I kind of want to do sort of a camp kitchen, I guess. Something you can either put on your belt or, put it, use in the kitchen or something. Basically an excuse or, just to have a reason to have bought that machine.
You don't need an excuse to buy tools, Birch, ever.
Yeah, your simple want is enough.
Mm-hmm.
So, Tom, AEBL, you like it for kitchens. Why? What's good about it for kitchen knives?
So, I mean, at Rockwell 60, it holds an edge well. It's a really fine grain steel, so it works good in the kitchen, and it's also extremely corrosion resistant. So, decent wear resistance, easy to sharpen, really high corrosion resistance. So, and it's tough. So, in a thin profile on a kitchen knife, it just seems to work really well.
I really wanted to try some of that Nitro V, but they didn't have any in the stuff I wanted.
I've got some.
Pretty fun.
Right now, we're getting ready to send it off to heat treat. So it's probably going to go out, this week. We've got something like 60 or 60 blades, I think, ready to go.
Nice.
So yeah, it should be fun. Mark, what have you been up to?
One question first.
Sure.
AEBL, what did you say was made from AEBL? Was it those Victorinox Fibrox knives or something else?
Yeah. The little paring knives are actually AEBL.
Yeah, okay. I was scratching my head going, I know I have an AEBL knife around here, and then I'm like, oh snap, I think it's my little kitchen knives.
For $5, those Swiss Army paring knives are the Victorinox Forstner paring knives are the best money you can spend.
Yeah, man, they do a ton of work.
Man, they sure do. They're easy to sharpen. They carry an edge well. They're hard to screw up. They're
flexible.
Awesome.
Yeah.
On my end, what's going on? I haven't done ray gun beads in a long time, so I'm trying to get some done for this weekend. I don't know how many times I've said that on this show, and I don't get them done. I got to edit the show, so I might not get them done actually, but sometime very soon. I'm really looking forward to doing some. We're going to run some out of copper, so hopefully I can get some copper atomic ray guns going. That would be something people have been asking about a lot. I had a couple prototypes that came out really, really cool, so hopefully we'll get those going here in a little bit. So.
That's awesome. Well, summer's such a busy time too, and you've got a full-time job, so.
Yeah, pesky job thing. I had a bunch of job stuff going on too, so I've been a busy guy.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I don't think, so Sean's next show is Kentucky. Only show this year.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be doing Kentucky also.
Nice.
See you there, buddy.
That's not my next show.
When's your next show, Tom?
Gathering.
Yep. Birch, you're going to the gathering as well.
True.
Sean, you're going, right?
Mm-mm. No, sir.
You're not going this year?
Nah, without a table, it's a bit too steep a price show for me to go to just to hang out.
But it's Vegas.
And man, you ask Rachel how me and Vegas get along together. She's fine with me not going to Vegas.
Yeah.
Everybody hates Vegas. I don't get it. I love
nobody.
Vegas.
I don't hate it at all.
Oh, all right.
Yeah. So Vegas is the next big show for many of us. I'll be at Kentucky as well. So we'll have 3 of the 4 horsemen down there. Are you going to join us in Kentucky, Birch?
Probably not. When is that?
First weekend of December. I think it's December 1 or December 2 this year.
I mean, anything's possible, but who knows?
They have bourbon.
Bourbon doesn't treat me that well.
I know.
I mean, it treats me a little too well.
If you like booze, there's all kinds of local breweries.
Nice. It's more.
Yeah, we just decided to go and ended up getting a table. So
it's more about getting stuff done for it, and finding time.
Well, hopefully you don't have to take much. They told me if I brought 1 or 2 pieces, I'd be good.
That's not bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a very fun show. It's been growing super rapidly, and so I don't know. I look forward to it. It'll be good. Okay, so that's it for show stuff. We talked about what's going on in the shop. We gave Randall an attempt at a shop for some history, and hopefully folks enjoy it. We're definitely not experts, so like the guy said, if we got it wrong, don't be shy about telling us and helping us fill in some blanks. If you know some stuff that we don't, we chime in on the Facebook group. We usually have a very good conversation there. We'll try to throw some pictures up in the Facebook group once we get this episode published, maybe of the specific models that we talked about on the show, that we each sort of did our little focus thing on, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, we didn't have to pass a test or get a license or anything to do this podcast. So if we get anything wrong, just let us know.
Unlicensed, unhinged, however you want to say it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so that's it for this episode, number 13, and we thank everybody for listening. Thanks again to everybody that talked to us at Blade Show and all the friends of the show that gave us little sound clips. We appreciate everybody pitching in on that, and we'll kind of sprinkle some of those in some future episodes as well. Now, coming up, our next episode, we're going to have our very first episode with a collector that some of our listeners know. I'm not going to say his name just yet. We'll save that and surprise you with it. But it should be a very cool episode with a collector who's got a very, very broad collection and is a very interesting person to talk to. So consider that a teaser, I guess. But we're going to get that recorded hopefully in the very first week of July if we can, and we'll try to keep on our regular cadence of getting the episodes out there for you. All right, you guys got anything else?
No, just thanks all. Appreciate the support.
Yeah, just thanks for listening.
Yep, 100%. Thanks for tuning in, and hopefully this gets you guys excited about Randall Knives.
Couldn't agree more, Tom. Hope everybody enjoyed the episode, and thanks for listening. To learn more about our makers, you can find Tom Crine on the web at crineknives.net, in his Facebook group, Crine Knives, or in his Instagram account, at Crine Knives. For Michael Birch, check birchtreeblades.com, Facebook group Birch Tree Blade Works, or Michael's Instagram at birchtreeblades. For myself and the Raygun Bead Project, we're on the web at raygundivision.com. We have a Facebook group called Raygun Division, or my personal Instagram, at msteiner. For those interested in photos, references from the show, or some discussion about the show itself, you can find us on the web at markofthemaker.com, in a Facebook group called Mark of the Maker, or on our Instagram, at Mark of the Maker. Last but not least, the ultra cool and haunting background music we use for the show is a piece called Noir Guitar by Stevie's Amp Shack, found at the Free Music Archive and licensed under Creative Commons CC BY 4.0. Thanks for listening.